On this episode of Clone Talk.
Once you have like a true 5-pointed leaf, take a cutting, dip it, stick it, root it, veg it, bios. These are going to be biohazard plants, right? A few good studies now about photoperiodism and cannabis plants and how light leaks don't cause seeds. What causes seeds is hermaphroditic tending plants. We got to preserve these water resources or else we're not going to have a viable agricultural system in 100 years or 20 years.
Hey team, Clone Coach here. Are you tired of struggling with your clones? Slow rooting times, purple stems, yellow growth, damping off, and so much more. Now, wherever you are in the world, the best tool to have in your nursery are the Clone Coach SOPs. These SOPs provide step-by-step instructions and expert guidance to get you the best clones ever. Join the team today at clonecoach.com. Welcome to Clone Talk, the show about cannabis from the eyes of industry professionals. I'm Paul, your clone coach, and with us today we have Jeff Thorne from Legit Exotics. Hi, Jeff. How are you today?
Yo, I'm good. How are you doing?
Excellent, brother. Excellent. We really got this good momentum going. We were chatting before we hit record here, but where are you joining us from here today?
I'm in southern British Columbia, Canada. So a little town called Penticton. It's in lake country. It's charming. We have cherry trees, peaches and stuff. Nice little farm ag zone.
Picturesque, huh?
A little bit. People come here on their vacations, so I feel lucky to wake up here. You know a thing or two about that, right?
A little bit, yeah. Where I'm from, it's a vacation zone too. So, we're both blessed in that sense. But
100%.
Tell us a bit more about your background and what was cannabis like growing up for you? Kind of the propaganda, the good or the bad, and what was it like growing up?
So, cannabis growing up was called weed, and it was pretty normalized. I'm like when I moved to BC when I was 15, and seriously, on the first day in high school, I was offered to buy weed in my math class. So I was kind of like, wow, that's quite prolific, the first day in BC. So BC has been known for weed for a long time prior to legalization. They had a massive export industry that predates me, certainly. But, when weed was really normalized, there was a little town called Kelowna is where I went to high school and I did my coming up. And like, man, there was 4 hydro stores in the mid 90s in a little town of like 50,000 people, right? So it was pretty prolific, the hydroponics industry at that time. It was all totally illegal. Many people had like a 4-light mortgage buster, they used to call them, in the garage or in like a little outbuilding. Big commercial grows, that was really done by, we'll call them more organized criminals that were maybe more visible to the community with that type of person. But there was a lot of people in the snowboarding and mountain biking scene when I was growing up that were, they had these little side revenue things. And we used to have a saying like, your weed either went into a bigger pile or a smaller pile, meaning it either went somewhere as a hub and moved into an offshore destination potentially, or it was broken up and dispersed locally. And most of my efforts initially were the prior, right? My weed went into like a bigger pile because we just had access to those markets, and that was pretty cool at the time. But yeah, I gotta say, growing up, it was everywhere. It was frowned upon, certainly, and it was pretty hard to hide when you were smoking it in high school and whatnot. But it was kind of everywhere, and for reference, I may look like I'm 100 years old, but I'm 42. So when I was in high school, it was about 25 years ago or so when we're talking about. So, yeah, it was everywhere, man.
BC Buds is a classic phrase, right? So, growing up in the British Columbia area, it's like it was, what California is to the United States, I guess, right? Like that's what its section is for Canada.
And BC's cannabis culture really dates back to the draft dodgers. So there's a bunch of expats that fled the U.S. to avoid going to the Vietnam War, and guess what they brought with them was seeds. And so BC's cannabis cultivation and culture, that really dates back to the Vietnam War. It evolved obviously into the 90s when I was began participating. I left my parents' house at 18 and immediately put a metal halide in a crawl space of a farmhouse that I dug the crawl space out of, right? So I dug out part of the basement area, put a little 400-watt metal halide, and started growing some
Love it.
seeds out immediately upon leaving my parents' house. Crawl spaces turned into basements, basements turned into warehouses, and multiple houses, and then that eventually evolved when medical licensing became available, where we thought, wow, we don't even have to steal power anymore to do this and not be detected. We can just grow and legally.
Hmm.
That's kind of when me and my partner at the time, we knew that we would be able to do this forever, basically, that cannabis was going to be so normalized and it would just end up being an actual industry. If we could grow it legally, then it's going to go commercial eventually. So we kind of went all in, bought an agricultural property after being, doing multiple warehouse builds with my brother's construction company and others. We decided to buy an ag property and build a purpose-built building for indoor cannabis production. And then we ended up adding greenhouses and doing some field production in parallel with vegetable as well. So we were doing market vegetable and cannabis production simultaneously off the same property for many years.
That's fantastic, man. I mean, I love the evolution of it, right? Because like once you realize you're in it, you're head down, and how can we make it bigger, better, faster, stronger, right? It's just like just
Yeah.
evolve as the industry itself evolves as well.
And my background prior to weed was actually in the wine industry. So boutique agriculture is kind of in our blood, and it's a big part of the economy in this region. So agritourism is an element of that, but it's also a boutique product that has mind altering effects and has a sensory evaluation element to it. So it's really, I've always thought that cannabis and wine production were
Mhm.
actually very, very similar. It's much more like wine than it is like tomatoes. Although people like to say that weed grows like tomatoes, that's not true at all. It's floriculture that's more like wine production. So and yeah, I mean, watching now, this a lot has happened in 25 years, right? We went from
Yeah.
stealing power and duffel bag Walmart stuff, Walmart parking lot stuff, to like now it's available in every jurisdiction basically. So the export side of things is changed scope completely. There's not, there's such a domestic American cannabis production now that there's no need for any kind of cross border stuff like there used to be. And you can buy it like groceries, right? Like weed here is, there's literally stores all over. Some of them might make money. It's being produced at large scale, in some cases at a loss, right? So there's big companies that are really skewing the consumer market trends, and it's gotten weird. I think things are going to normalize, but it's right now. There's scale is outpacing demand, and a lot of markets, and trying to associate the product that you have with the shelf placement was overlooked by many of these first movers as well. It was just about the canopies and the auroras going scale, 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 scale without proving out any
Mhm.
actual demand for those products. So that was we could all see that coming basically, right? And I was a part of it. We were building big greenhouses, and I was like, okay, this
Yeah.
scale, like we're going to sell this. Where's this going to go? Where are their distribution partners? You got to line all that up. It doesn't matter what your capacity is; it matters what your sales are. So keeping it real is kind of important nowadays.
100%. And I love your comparison on the wine industry because it's true. I mean, there's small winemakers that you've never even heard of, even if you're a wine connoisseur, right? Like that or maybe you don't even have access to, or just to gain access, you have to really make an effort to find that local retailer or that local distributor that's carrying that certain vintage of wine and stuff. And then there's stuff that's available everywhere that you don't even want to look at because it's just available everywhere, and it's $5 chuck, right? And so like
Yeah,
that comparison to cannabis is really starting to show itself because these mass scale players are just producing just to produce, even if it's at a loss. And then there's some people that are really putting their heart into it and really producing stuff that really hits you, with all those, the palettes and all those senses really starting to come and really make it a really good, enjoyable experience.
it's like wine in that you need to know how to shop for it. If it's your first time going to a store to buy a bottle of wine, you might not come back with something that somebody who drinks wine regularly will appreciate. You might grab
Right.
something with a
100%.
llama on the label or something, and you'd be like, "Here you go, I bought some great wine." People are like, "Well, that's not really what we think of when we think of fine grade wines. I don't drink anymore either,
Right.
but it's just funny because I'm like, I'll still taste wine with my wife from time to time. And, often some bottles will come through the house and it's like, wow, that's not good. And there's some locally produced wines that are not good. There's a bunch of locally produced cannabis that's not good and it often comes in a value format, like an outsized format. Some people
Mm.
just they don't never develop a palate though. They don't really care. Weed is just weed. Who cares? I buy the cheapest ounce I can get. After my kids go to sleep, I smoke it and I go to bed, and that's the end of their weed experience. But I would venture the bulk of the market is people that like want to appreciate or learn more and be like, yeah, those are that's the chirps that I like in the morning, like that gives me
Mhm.
the effect that I like. And I have confidence in this producer because their products are always like high quality. The nose is still present in the bag by the time you get it or the jar. It's not old
The
and over
snap, the
dried and
squeeze,
fucking turns
the
into
amount
dust.
of the curing,
Yeah.
all
So
of it.
and then even just like this distillate thing where, if you're growing, there's going to be a huge market for distillate. There always will be. But growing like high grade cannabis that eventually is turned into should not be a remediation tool. We should be growing crops for extract, not, oh, that didn't work out. So let's just smash it into oil. Like you can polish a turd a little bit, but really what we want to do is grow crops that are specific for their end product category, not the other way around. Figure out what we're going to do with these crops after we get them 3/4 of the way through. It's really about growing for extract or growing for a dry flower product or growing for a fresh frozen. Or there's really it's also much like wine, harvest dates and the varieties that are selected are often for the product category that you're producing.
Yeah, those are very good points because it's really true. It's and there's all those different aspects of consumers, right? There'll be a little bit of everything, but I feel like the way the industry has been evolving as of late, the consumers that are really wanting those all that effort that's really put into that final package, we're kind of getting trumped by this excess of just that $5 chuck, that just bulk stuff that just is just weed to smoke at the end of the day. It's like I want something that's enjoyable. Like I want an experience that I could really kind of dissect myself, because if you've been a connoisseur or a purveyor of cannabis for a while and you're like those little nuances, you look for them. So you don't want to just have those things be ignored.
One of the challenges that we have here in Canada, you can't even see the product at most of the stores. They come in opaque. It comes in opaque packages that the retailer, they're not necessarily. Some high end retailers will open some jars and they'll display them and they'll actually sell that jar to the last consumer. It'll be like the floor model. They're not even at a discount. But my point is if you're going in to buy these products without being able to even look at them, you really don't know what you're getting. So some of the value category products, when you think, wow, that's competitively priced, and you get it, you open it up, you're like, what did it like? It doesn't matter that it's $100 ounce. It's not good. I
Right.
am
You're like,
of the
now I
mindset
see
that
why.
yeah, I would much rather buy a $200 ounce if I'm going to buy a premium product and then, actually enjoy it, because I'm at that time in my life where weed is not a commodity. Like mediocre weed is already everywhere. It's everywhere. I got totes of it in my fucking garage from last year that I haven't turned into hash. Everybody's growing it in their yards. It's easy to access it. There are groups that are growing large fields, trying to figure out where to sell this stuff, trying to figure out where to dry this stuff, trying to figure out a path to market with it. So differentiation, as when we talk about from a commercial perspective, because I assume that most people that are looking at these types of industry podcasts and whatnot, we're talking commerce here. We're not talking home grow like I like to do to characterize seeds. We're talking about commercial floricultural production of premium cannabis goods and a path to market. What the consumers are begging for is consistency, because there's really very little brand loyalty in any emerging cannabis market right now. There's just it's hit and miss. It's CPG companies that are trying to like spot buy and commercialize products to market, and then they're spot buying a different. Oh, that didn't really work out, and it's not. There's very little like multi-state operator that have really consistent product in each market, and they're priced according to the product quality, and that value proposition is consistent across markets because everything is so isolated. And even in Canada here we have these national brands, but every province is like its own little jurisdiction where distribution happens. So not every SKU will be available to every province, nor will it be nationally distributed because it takes a certain size lot to do that. So yeah, a lot of challenges with growers at all scales, whether it's the capital requirements or the actual regulatory hurdles to get just the products to the market. Because I mean, I can see why Oklahoma is so popular. Um,
Yeah, I
it's like
mean,
new Cali. It's like old Cali.
it is. It is. I mean, and it's getting hit hard right now. There's a lot of raids, and there's a flushing of the system happening there and stuff. But it's you're right. There is no consistency. There's no brand loyalty yet, just because it's so spotty everywhere. So it's as a
Yeah,
consumer, we're getting the short end of the stick as consumers, and as companies are evolving, and this I feel like there's this big transitioning happening in the industry, right? Where at a certain point years ago, the consumers had the upper hand. The consumers were the winners in the industry, right? Where they were getting what they wanted, and it was this whole system was kind of moving along fluidly. And now with all these this influx of people that want to commercialize a product, with some have good intentions and some don't, but now we're having to feel those effects at a consumer level, which I think right now consumers are getting the short end of the stick. So, what are your thoughts on exactly that, the transition that's happening like in the last 5 years, really, and kind of where we are today?
5 years ago, like compared to today, there was very few legacy operators in most of the emerging cannabis markets. There were some, don't get me wrong, but the regulatory requirement was really high. There's even regulations in some cases to keep anybody with criminal record or anybody with cannabis history. There's many different security clearance requirements depending on what market you're in. There's many different regulations to keep legacy people out of the sector. So that produced not great consumer products. Now we're seeing more and more legacy operators in many jurisdictions. There's even some amnesty licenses being given in some jurisdictions, right, to really like make up for some of the wrongs of cannabis, in law enforcement. But now we're seeing a flood of legacy groups entering into the commercial cannabis regulated space, and that's had a really interesting side effect. Not only for consumer quality, so we're seeing properly grown and cured and distributed products, but also plant viruses, like the likes of which we've never seen before. There was, lots of plant viruses circulating previously, most of which were cosmetic and didn't have many agronomic impacts. But with the discovery of hop latent, however, I guess 2015 was when it was first discovered, but it has proliferated to a point that is like actually mind-boggling within the cannabis sector. And this isn't just this cross-state transport of clones that started in 2014 when Colorado, Oregon, and Washington legalized, but previous to that, there was a bunch of distribution of clones from medical growers and people taking personal risk to do these types of activities. But
Mhm.
man, with the more and more legalization and the more and more closet breeding and not much testing happening with these, medical grows for plant pathogens, just the seed stock is contaminated, the cuts are contaminated. Groups don't realize just how transmissible this virus is, this viroid is. It's bad, and there's worse viruses on their way. As cannabis is adapted as more of a normalized crop within agricultural industries, we're seeing larger scale operations happen in ag areas, which is where plant pathogens vector because that's where all the plant processing and propagation happens. So we're seeing not only insects but other viral and bacterial pathogens adapting to cannabis plants that are and will have future significant agronomic impact on the industry.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And to that point, what do you let's transition a bit into kind of the current professional end of where you are right now, right? Because I know you have a really solid background with organics and seed production and that whole aspect of cultivation. So maybe let's dive into a bit more on genetics and seeds and who is that really geared for and who is really the perfect candidate for that type of product?
Yeah, so just like when we talk about producing products for a product category, not just figuring out where to put these flowers at the end of the production cycle. That starts at the time of selection of plant variety. So when we talk about selection of plant variety, what is our production model? Is this a vertical garden? Is this an boutique indoor thing? Is this a large scale commercial indoor thing, which are going to, I think, be rare in the next 15 years? They're going to probably wind down. And what we're going to see is, three models. We'll have boutique indoor, commercial greenhouse, and field cultivation. Field
Hmm.
cultivation, we're seeing better and better autoflowers coming out as these lines are being stabilized and as we're breeding out the ruderalis nose and having more true to photoperiod auto-flowering seeds. We're seeing great results here. I'm partnered with a company, Atlas Seeds, out of Sonoma County. We do lots of distribution for them. Atlas is one of the leaders in the space for production of autoflower seeds. We also have a photo period catalog with them. When we talk about large scale, it's very difficult to sustain nursery operations and scale up cuttings to tens of thousands of plant per acre. And we're talking about multi-acre farms here. Those propagation nurseries are really focused on seed. It's the only way to do this at any kind of significant scale. We do on the photo period side, we do select mothers, we do produce cuttings, generally for breeding purposes. There are some growers that are doing that for their farm production, but one of the things I often warn or I educate growers is if you're growing a sub-auto, let's say it finishes in the first week of September, that means it'll start flowering in June. That means you need to select your mothers from that crop and veg them under lights indoors for July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. Maybe you start taking cuttings in March,
Hmm.
push them out in April. That's 8
Yeah.
months of vegging under lights and not generating revenue from that licensed, HVAC'd, staffed, consuming area. That's a long time. So a silo, which could be the size of a black and yellow tote, could contain enough seeds to fill all of the outdoor farms in Canada. You don't need to run lights all day long for 18 hours a day for 9 months to retain stock when we can produce stock that's consistent and push it out to fields in a much more agronomic approach. So that's big dog, big problem, big scale, big
Yeah.
sales, big distillate manufacturing, big. Greenhouse model, which I'm very familiar with, is generally we've had a hard time scaling cannabis production to these glass houses that grow cocktail tomatoes and other vine crops. There's a few groups out there that are doing it, but I think we can all agree the quality as the scale goes up kind of tends to go down, and it's mostly because of processing. The areas to process, a craft flower operation, you need between 25 to 15% of your total flowering canopy to just dry the product in an air drying system. So I don't know very many groups that have 4-acre greenhouses that have an acre of drying room. It just doesn't exist, right? So it's
Right.
really difficult to make an air dried, properly cured cannabis product at glass commercial greenhouse scale. Up into about an acre, there's groups that are doing really high grade, in my opinion and experience. And then they have a small, fairly large, but they have a drying room that's really efficient and turned over regularly, and they're doing it that way. And that's the groups that are right on the cusp of, do I grow from cuttings and bank mother plants and pathogens, insects, or do I go seed? There's probably a mixed model in there that makes sense depending on what the product category is. If it's a value ounce of weed, does it really need to be super totally 100% uniform, like the way that a traditional clonal propagation nursery operates, and you get exact clonal, no seed variants at all?
Hmm.
And like the argument is out on that. Like, so the reason why we grow from clones is we found varieties that we like that are they work in our production model. It's obviously one phenotype because it's one plant that you can start from. If we're growing from high-end stabilized seed, though, you maybe have 2 phenos in there. So it maybe affects your harvest date. It's not the, when I go out and bought breeders packs of 100 seeds previously, you'd get 100 different plants in some cases. So that's not production seed. That's not what we're, discussing as industry stakeholders. What we're really talking about is stabilized F1s that have hybrid vigor, that provide a better structured plant in a lot of cases, and are faster than clones, and less energy and staff intensive than clonal propagation. And then my favorite production model, though, is the craft guy that's got the small little indoor that has his own dispensary and is straight to market. And you can come smell the jars, and you can come meet the grower and have tacos in the parking lot on Fridays or whatever. Like, that's, I think, what everybody actually wants out there. But that's a tough one for investment, because owner operator is generally how those type of businesses are structured, and that's for a bunch of reasons.
Yeah, and those aren't really investable businesses, all the time. There may be great businesses for that owner operator, maybe good
Yeah.
little family business, but it's usually not an investable business, right? Because it just doesn't scale up in that sense, which makes a lot of sense. But it's really, you can't really not ignore, but you can't really stop the progression of the mass scale production, because as the consumers, in theory, all over the world, want this product, you have to fill that void with a bigger scale production, right? And like you said, if it's a value-based ounce, then that consumer is really not going to, complain, or really maybe even be able to identify the slight variances in the phenotypes amongst that stabilized seed. So it's just really, like you said, it's really geared towards what that end product is really going to be going towards. So those are very, very good points.
And to be clear, generally when there's 2 phenotypes, we just do 2 different harvest dates and sort the lot that way. And there'll be some variance, because it's like, a seed, the morphology of a different seedling can be slightly different than another. And that's okay, because the cost of production is just so much lower that you just have to understand that, like, it's a different value offering. And a lot of it goes to oil, but the stuff, there's still tons of sellable flower that's being grown from seed. And name another, a consumable crop that's grown. It's an annual that we clone. Like, it goes against the natural biology of the plant. Like, it propagates by seed if you just leave it alone for long enough. It's naturally prone to do that. So, other orchids are really clonal propagated, but all of the vegetables that we eat are grown from seed.
That's a very, very good point. Are there any particular genetics that are really exciting, at this mass scale that you're talking about, the stabilized seeds, that are really prone best for extracts? Like you said, either oils or hash, or any kind of other extract options like that?
Would you be surprised if I said OG? I hate to
I
keep
think some
bringing
people
it
would
back to
be.
that conversation, right? But like, a lot of the OG crosses are typically what the consumers are after. Like, fruit's great, but people love gas. Like, the heady consumers that are going through, like, lots of rosin, they want that gas, bro. Like, I love the fruits, especially the citruses, but it's always comes full circle back to that anchor, which is gas. So different. One of the things that we're discovering, and we have been discovering for a long time, is that different plants wash differently. So if you're growing for oil, you want a good, easy washer. There's nuance to get some crops for those trichome heads to break off properly, but the morphology of the plant doesn't stop at its leaf and bract and branch structure. It's also the chemical element to it, and how easy it is to wash off of the plant matter. So there's definitely some varieties that are classic. GMO is a classic, like, good washer. We sell a lot of seeds of that to extractors specifically that are making, even the distillate conversion, because it produces good THC and it's easy to get off the plant. Now, all the connoisseurs will always end up coming back to rare, new, like, consumers want a novel strain. There's always a hype strain. You're from California, Meg. It's like all culture, popular culture. It originates in California, and it just permeates the continent and the globe. And that's fashion, that's music, that's like all the bullshit that people subscribe to with these celebrities. But it's also weed culture. So what California does first, it really kind of has that ripple effect. So we're always, our seed company is based in California, and we are looking at, what's coming out. A bunch of our new drops are Oreos crosses, which I'm excited to grow out. But what we're trying to do from a seed production perspective is produce stable lines that growers can have commercial success with. And if you get into the retail side of things, we recommend a variety pack because we do have a lot of different offerings. And, home growers can have like that same kind of, not pheno hunting experience, but like have that variety pack experience of something that's actually a good producer. I was getting sick and tired of popping 10 packs and not finding anything that produced enough mass for me to even get through 2 months of smoking weed, right? So we want, like, doesn't matter if you're a commercial grower or home grower, you want enough production to meet like your expectation. And I mean, a lot of these 10 packs, I'm telling you out there, they just don't. And a lot of, I think everybody who's bought seeds can attest to that. It's like, it is just a polyculture of phenotypical expression, most of which doesn't work out in a commercial or a private setting. So it's, seed producers to date have not been rewarded for producing a lot of consistent high value seeds. They've been rewarded for producing a pheno hunting experience that you have to endeavor down. And if you do find that needle in the haystack, well, then that's amazing. But it's,
Right.
We always pheno hunted with at least 50 to 100 seeds, at least per variety, at least trying to find one that was viable. So that's tough when you're at home. When you're regulated and I can only grow 4 plants at home, I don't want a bunch of bullshit, man. I need fucking some big ass flowers to get me through, right? Like it's about production, no matter what scale you're operating at. So, and hybrid vigor is a real thing. I'm telling you, like you want fresh, growing from seed produces stronger plants that have less, obviously the risk of disease is lower. It's not zero. The risk of virus is lower. It's not zero. But the risk of insect is zero. So it's a great way to like reset your garden too. And then, when you find something in those photo periods that you like, re-veg that, then start cloning, right?
Yeah.
That's people overlook re-vegging too. People think you got to retain this stock and put it in the bag and let the workers spread all the viruses all over it all over, like over and over and over again. And then by the time they get the chemical data back of that seedling, the thing is already diseased and fucked up in your nursery because it's been exposed to all the pathogens. So if you keep your flower room clean enough, man, just re-veg or have a special tent to do the re-veg and then really dip the cuttings that you pull out of it. It's a great tool that we've been using for a long time, and it's only just starting to catch on now that it doesn't change the biology or the expression of the phenotype to re-veg it.
Are you a cannabis grower looking for reliable and accurate pathogen testing for your plants? Look no further than MyFlora DNA. Their state-of-the-art lab offers testing for hop latent viroid, fusarium, as well as other pathogens that can cause harm to your crops. Trust them to provide you the information that you need to ensure the health of your plants. And for a limited time, use discount code CloneCoach at checkout for up to 20% off your entire order. Don't let pathogens ruin your crop. Choose MyFlora DNA for all of your cannabis testing needs. Now back to the show.
So on that note, I mean, there's a lot of people that reach out to me that say, hey, how far into flower can I clone? Or, I really found this winner, I want to clone it, and it's, week 8 of flower, right? And there's always, some, difficulties there when trying to take a clone at that point. But maybe what are some tips and tricks that you would suggest or share for re-vegging, or really, like you said, you found a pheno that you like from seed and you want to put that into a mother stock and start cloning from it? What are some tips and tricks that you would share to either re-veg or clone at a later stage flower?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And tips to re-vegging, there are many different techniques, but I can just speak to my experience and to what works. So one thing I'm going to say is the earlier you choose to do this process, the faster it will be and the higher likelihood of success. You can probably up into like week 3 or 4 even, take a cutting, because when the branches are still fairly soft, and you can probably take a cutting and you can probably stick it and root it, and it'll begin to push vegetative tissue underneath your clone lights. But that means that you're taking a cut from a plant that hasn't even gotten close to finishing yet. So
Right.
the value in doing that re-veg process isn't nearly the same as you get it through to the end. You could even, and be like, that's a winner. It doesn't matter what the chemical data comes back at. We know we want to proceed with that one. So I'd
Mhm.
like to just discuss that process, because that's much better use of this tool that we have.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume that everybody's growing in a container. So if you're not growing in a container, you're going to be growing in a Rockwell slab. Hopefully that's a unislab. If it's a long slab, you're going to have to cut the slab and do some polying and get the individual plant that you're selecting to be able to move that, obviously. So what we're going to do is, it's really simple. We're going to crop the whole top of the plant, leaving a few bottom flowers to get it right back down to a small plant. We're going to, that crop that we're going to take, we're going to dry that. We're going to turn that into some dank weed that we're going to prove out chemically that this is a commercial variety, or that this does have the whatever qualities that your characteristics you're after. Now you have just a few small flowers at the bottom of this container. You can do a couple of different things. One thing I like to do is take it out of the container and root prune it. So cut some of the roots and just knock that root mass down. We've removed a large amount of plant canopy. We have a large root mass, just more than what is needed to support that canopy. So some
Mhm.
root pruning is a prudent thing to do here. Let's pot it up into some fresh cocoa coir media. And then let's move it from the high intensity lighting at 12 hours of photo period, of your DLI of like 40 to 50 or whatever. And let's pull that into a lower intensity light environment with a longer photo period. I would even recommend doing 24 hours. So no night break for respiration in the plant at this point. And we're
Mhm.
going to put it in under that low, when I say low, let's call it like 300 micromole max. And we're going to leave the plant there. We're going to keep it wet, not excessively, but we'll keep it moist, using like a low EC veg feed. And simple like that. It doesn't always work. If you let the plant dry out too much, the roots will die back, and it's very unlikely to push new tissues. But if you just kind of keep it wet and just give it small amounts of water regularly, and just keep it under a low light environment with high-ish humidity, you'll start to push new tissues.
Hmm.
One of the things you're going to want to do is also, um, once you've removed it and there's, let's say, 3 or 4 little flowers at the bottom, let's load it up with bios. Let's make sure that we've got a good bio colony established on that, so that whatever thrip or mite or aphid or whatever you're dealing with in that greenhouse uh, doesn't make it into our bedroom. Let's also do this in an isolated area that's not with the rest of your stock plants, because you're bringing in the highest risk plant from disease and insect pressure in your building, which is the very end of flower, the
Mhm.
oldest plants, right? So, and it's really just as simple as that. um, I have had 90% success rate. So the ones that don't work out, it's usually because I let them dry out too much, or they were really, really, really overripe and they had dried back aggressively prior to harvest. But this is a very easy plant to re-veg. And then as soon as you'll start to see like a weird leaf, and then it'll push a shoot. And then once you have like a true leaf, once you have like a true 5-pointed leaf, take a cutting, dip it, stick it,
Yeah.
root it, veg it, bios. These are going to be biohazard plants, right? We're going to want to test them for hop latent. That can be done with a field assay. These things are available. Companies like Medicinal Genomics. There's a bunch of them out there that offer these things. But we're going to always want to test new seedlings that we're going to retain stock of before we introduce it into our propagation area. And that's like just the first barrier of defense, because groups are not realizing that it's like holding stock to find out about it is not how we need to do this moving forward. We need to get as much data about these plants before we even begin to hold stock. So that's the whole argument for re-vegging these selected photoperiod strains.
And what kind of time frames do you usually see on average for that transition to happen?
A couple weeks.
Oh, so I mean that's relatively speaking, that's fast. I mean, if you're, even if it's a month or so, like that's acceptable. So even even at a 30-day turnaround, that's acceptable.
Yeah, you'll see. Like, I mean, I don't think you'll have a 5-inch clone in a couple weeks, but in a couple
Right.
weeks, you should see if it's going to work out. Which, like I said, I've had great success. You'll see it begin to push a little stem and a little, almost like a cotyledon leaf. And once it's expressing a true leaf, take a cutting of that. That can be that's 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So
Nice.
and but the problem is everybody wants things to be. We're from the MTV generation, right? We all want everything to be fast, and this is a fast plant. Like
Yeah.
from seed to harvest compared to other, grapes or apples and other crops that we eat, perennial crops that we eat. This is a pretty fast annual, fast flowering. But doing something like that reversal from flowering to vegetative, it takes a while. There's also like a bunch of false, like we'll call it tribal knowledge from the legacy space about seeds and where seeds come from and light leaks and photoperiodism. And there's
Hmm.
more than a few good studies now about photoperiodism and cannabis plants and how light leaks don't cause seeds. What causes seeds is hermaphroditic tending plants, period. So stress factors on plants that are predetermined or call it predisposed to hermaphroditic tendencies are what cause these issues. Um, and every cannabis plant that has ever grown and ever will grow has the ability to express either gender. This is how we make feminized seeds, but it's also how plants that are prone to this have started circulating, and that's one of the issues with growing from seed as well. So we select these clones and we clone, which is great, but sometimes some of the seeds that are made from those clones especially when you're doing a feminized seed process, are prone to hermaphroditic tendencies. So you got to be really careful when you start doing things like revegging. Is like, is that going to be a stress factor that could cause pollen to even cause a banana to push from one of these old dank flowers, right? So it's not necessarily light leak, but stress factors on plants, which revegging can cause issues like male tissues developing. And yeah, there's plenty of genetics out there that are prone to hermaphroditic tendencies, and the growers are blaming light leaks or other environmental factors when really it's genetic. So this is what I mean about we got to figure out all this data about these plants before we bring them into a commercial setting and invest in them. So
Right.
yeah, research gardens are critical for this stuff, for characterization and for not only phenotypical, selection, but plant production from a seed perspective needs to be done with a lot of intent.
Those are very good points. I mean, because everybody assumes that little baby light here and there, or the piece of equipment has a little light that just shining through is the reason why their entire crop is giving out herms or giving out seeds or something, right? So it's a very
No,
interesting
it's all
point
bullshit.
to
An
start
individual
getting
that's Yes. Sorry. I was going to
to
say
start.
one guy that's written extensively about it is Stuart Maxwell. Check him out on LinkedIn and online, Xylem Horticulture, the elevated botanist. Yeah, no, this photoperiodism in cannabis plants is often misunderstood.
Interesting. So it's more based on the stressors that the plant is experiencing, and if the genetic itself is more prone to have those tendencies, then yes.
100%. Yeah. And that's another reason why when breeders are releasing seeds, they really need to be actually tested and actually proven, because there's tons of Hermy packs out there. And I think a lot of individuals are blaming themselves when if the genetic is predisposed to it, to like it's almost assured. We've seen this with a bunch of S1s. A lot
Hmm.
of S1s are prone to hermaphrodites. So those are not commercially viable seeds. And it actually gave feminized seed a really bad name for a long time because growers thought they were just herms. But
Right.
we've again proven that that's not the case, and you can use feminized seed for breeding purposes as well. It's just some F1s. It seems like some varieties are prone to, like, when you self it, because you're like, I love this cutting. That I think a lot of groups have done that to proliferate the genetic and not realizing the knock-on effects can cause hermaphroditic tendencies in their lines.
Very, very interesting. Let's transition a bit into organics, because I know you have a very vast knowledge based on organics and cultivating in an organic fashion. So what are just some insights as far as cultivating with an organic method?
So organics, it's interesting. We call conventional agriculture is chemical-based agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
when organic really is conventional agriculture. The organic way of growing, people talk about Korean natural farming, which I like. That has a really exotic sound to it. But as a Westerner, that sounds so exotic to me. But these are farming practices that predate chemical agriculture, which is really a novel convention of the 1950s. Post-war era, there was all these chemical companies that were looking for products that they could manufacture and get to market, and bada bing, bada boom, let's go round up everything, and let's GMO crops to make them glyphosate resistant, for Christ's sake. So that GMOs, genetically modified organisms, that the whole intention with that technology was to feed the world, for Christ's sake. Drought resistant crops, more abundant yields, insect resistance in some cases. The intent with that technology was not to produce herbicide resistant varieties of soy and corn. So when we talk about organics, we're really talking about traditional farming, and the inputs that most certified organic systems use are very safe. So the exposure to these things is typically safe for not only the grower, but the consumer, as well as the environment around it. So I started my agricultural career in the early 90s working for Canada's largest organic winery. The estate vineyard was 27 acres, and we sourced grapes from vineyards in the valley that ranged in size, and I think it was maybe about 200 acres total at the time. It was one of the original wineries in the BC VQA, which is the Vintners Quality Alliance. So they were really focused on organic and quality wines back in an era when wine was really about tonnage. How much tons of grapes can you get off the vines, and then we'll mix Rogers sugar with it. We'll make this slosh that people would guzzle down, the 2 buck chuck type 1980s wines that you were mentioning at the top of the call.
Yeah.
So organic farming was how I learned how to farm as a teenager, and we were certified, which meant that we had regulated inputs that we were able to use. For cannabis, most cannabis was grown in the illicit market hydroponically because it was indoor, closed loop, easy to contain, hide, and conceal fashion. But as this has been normalized as an agricultural crop, and as it scales, it's becoming more and more challenging to run these traditional drain to waste hydro systems. Drain to waste hydro systems should be illegal. If you're going to grow hydroponically, you should have to recirculate your water and sterilize it and demineralize it and toss a cake of minerals in a landfill, not poison our watershed with phosphorus and nitrates. So hydroponics as an industry, when you talk about vegetable scale, there's very little drain waste. All that drain waste water is used, or it's treated. There's some parts of brine that are discarded, but they have water treatment, and in some cases diaphragm filters to really clean water really well, and UV to sterilize it. So when we talk about hydroponic vegetables, all of those water systems are closed loop generally, and treated water. But indoor cannabis growers, man, they love to just dump salt water down the sewer. They love to buy salt water in a bottle, throw those bottles in the landfill, and then pour that salt water into the same aquifer that I get my drinking water from. So it's completely upside down. It should be illegal. There should be more regulations at a state, provincial, and national level for these things. So that's the direction that hydro is going. Now, with organic inputs, they're a fraction of the price as well. Once you know what you're doing and you're buying protein meals, so fish bone, blood bone, feather, clover meal. There's like a number of these protein meals that we amend soil with. We also use fish fertilizers, fish hydrosolite. In some cases we use soy hydrosolite. You can run a fully hydroponic certified organic system. It's quite expensive, but it really becomes more about measuring what's happening in the media than measuring what's happening in the water line when you're growing in an organic living soil system. It's not, I'll say it's not easy to establish, but it's very easy to sustain an organic system. there's not without challenges, but it's like pick your challenge, right? Do you have a wastewater and a treatment plant and all this for your hydro system, or do you have a ongoing colony of beneficial microbes that you're fostering inside of your organic system? And that's really what it comes down to. Is it's like, do you believe in, plant magic, as one of my grower peers told me, or do you believe in a completely sterile environment? We've proven out that in greenhouse environments, we can grow certified organic weed, cannabis, that does pass the microbial tests. I've also seen a bunch of indoor hydro weed that's failed microbial tests. So this old misnomer of like, oh, organic is too dirty, you can't grow compliant weed with that. I would venture that the air handling units in your indoor grow really need deep sanitation, and you're not even aware of that. So yeah, organic inputs are cheap, they're safe. You end up watering primarily with just straight water. The leachate from that can be collected and reused, or if it's discarded, it is far less harmful to any of the aquifer. It became about preservation for us, to be honest. We only have so much water. We are our own water resource. If we salt the earth too badly, our water source is going to be contaminated, and then we won't be able to grow successful crops. So rather than poisoning our precious resource that is the watershed, we were going to try to, we preserve it. And I think a lot of growers in Salinas can relate to the watershed problems. One of my homies down there, he didn't even add fertilizer to his nursery because it was coming up at 1.5 EC, primarily of nitrate fertilizers from his neighbor's vegetable operations. And then so we got to preserve these water resources, or else we're not going to have a viable agricultural system in 100 years or 20 years.
Right. So what are some good tips to really, like you said, create that solid base? Because that seems to be the not the tricky part, but like the where you got to put most of your efforts into. So what is the inputs that you want to really ensure you're gathering to create a solid base for your organic cultivation?
I like cocoa with perlite and compost. This is also my homie Stuart's recipe that he's been developing for decades, and lots of big commercial and small growers have had great success with. So it's a mix of cocoa and perlite with compost, either a mushroom or a fish compost that has not only chemistry but a ton of biology. We then add the protein meals to it, so feather, bone, blood, and uh, other protein meals. I don't have the list in front of me, and that's all in ratio. And then what we always want to do is also just like use kelp. Kelp is a bit of that plant magic. Use kelp at your watering events, your watering in events, at your planting events. Anytime you do a stress factor in the plant, pruning, kelp, planting, kelp. Yeah, so those elements all like in harmony when you start to the compost will bring that biology, and then we always use a trichoderma. So trichoderma also helps just to protect those root systems when they're young, and that's really keeping it simple. Like the Kiss Organics is also a great resource. They're doing it on a cleanest, scalable way possible. That's the other thing I want to always discuss too. Is like there are some like KNF methods that are just like broad fork farming that just simply don't comply with how you can scale this up. When you're running a commercial greenhouse, you're not like, being a no-till gardener. Like you're not bringing in cover crops. Cover crops in a controlled environment agriculture have never made sense to me. It just vectors insect problems and adds humidity to your space. It's not. It's really for looks, right? Planting clover around your weed plants indoors has never made sense to me. But yeah. So continuing to inoculate and bring up your levels and measuring what's happening in your root system is what's most important. And that means using labs too. I'm not talking about just doing an EC test. What is the actual mineral constituency of your soil over the long term? And then when you do your amendments, you base those on the data you're getting back from the agricultural lab as to the constituents of your media. Hydro is easy. You crank that shit up and down.
Your amendments are based on like your stage of growth too, like early veg, early flower, late flower, or is that?
You can go there,
Mhm.
but generally in your flowering bays, you just keep it to the same formula. And in your veg nursery, you have you have like a potting mix that you establish for veg. So yeah, higher on the nitrogen and veg, but we got to a point where we're also really dripping in a lot of like 1600 from I can't remember what company that is, but yeah, we really like that product. It was a soy based nitrogen protein.
Gotcha. And is there for the initial kind of charge up on that soil, is there a time frame where it has to kind of cook before you could really start planting into it?
So all of the inputs come sterile, or you can run into a big problem. So we're always buying like, and if you're doing any export activities, your inputs need to come from a regulated source. So it's really important that we're buying like not necessarily just like blood bone meal from my pig farmer friend. It's like you need to buy it from a regulated source because then it gets pasteurized properly. The
Gotcha.
compost won't be pasteurized, so it's good to have analysis done on any compost ingredients that you're bringing in. So you don't necessarily, the compost gets baked in the sun, but it doesn't actually get pasteurized to sterilize it. Where most of the other
Right.
like protein meal products come like pretty clean. It's important that they come in clean because again, we're trying to like foster the beneficial organisms and suppress naturally the non-beneficial things like pythium and fusarium and stuff like that. You'll see all manner of mushrooms and stuff growing and active colonies of fungal and microbiological colonies that you can in some cases like see. There'll be strange insects sometimes too that are not cannabis insects. That's another one you got to come wrap your head around as an organic grower. Is it's like not every insect is bad.
Right.
It's like
Right.
some of them just exist in the compost, and we saw like silverfish and stuff, like other things we would get identified using our partners, the entomologists. But it's like we use copert, and yeah, some of the growers would send photos and it'd be like, "Don't worry, that's not a cannabis pest." Oh, well then, what's the less to worry about, right? Like not every insect is bad. That's a very chemical farmer perspective, right? Is just like blanket spray everything, and if I see anything moving, we have a problem.
Right. Right. When you're growing organically like that for flower, is there a procedure for flushing as well, where it's very common to have that mindset, in a hydroponic setting? Is there a flushing that goes along with organic cultivation?
Well, considering we just give them water the whole time, anyways, it's kind of not. What we do find is that there's
Right.
desiccation to the leaves that happens when the plants get to a certain age, and if you have enough light, that happens earlier in in the number of days, and in a lower light environment, plants ripen and grow slower. So a hot, high lit environment, plants just grow faster and they finish. So if we're just giving them water the whole time, what we actually do is we tend to let the crops dry more thoroughly prior to harvest. So moreover than doing like
Hmm.
a flushing, we actually let them hit like a drought condition a couple times in that last week of the schedule where we think they're going to finish. And typically, there's another harvest date is always comes up as a question, and it's like people you put out their loops and they're like when they come up with these bullshit metrics like when 25% of the trike's amber, then it's harvest date. But there's so many different variables that go into that, like what your product you're growing for example. So if you're growing for peak potency, I would actually argue that might be a bit light. But yeah, it's so we generally will harvest based on the amount of light that the plant has accumulated over the time it's been flowering. And yeah, flushing, I'd rather see the crop dry out a few times to boost potency prior to harvest rather than actually like leaching out the soil, because if we do it right, the crop has consumed most of what's available at that time in these living soil cultures, and then whether they'll get harvested and it'll get amended, and let's go reboot.
Very, very interesting. Um, there's a lot of very good points you had in there, man. I'm sure the listeners are going to gain a lot of
Oh god,
knowledge, a lot of value from all those tidbits there. But before we
some
get
people
closer to
probably call
wrapping
me
up
out.
here,
People probably call me out
you
and be
know,
like, "That's bullshit. That's not my experience. I see a different perspective."
I've had the same experience. People have called me out on certain tactics or certain procedures that I do as well. But look, at the end of the day, I let the plant speak for me. So if the plant and the results are doing the speaking for me, I don't need to get into a one-on-one battle with all these, naysayers and stuff. And look, I may be wrong in something. I'm only human, and there's a million ways to cultivate this plant, right? And everybody's form of like what is right is slightly varied, right? Because we all have different perspectives, different points of views, different end goals and stuff. So that's just the art of this plant here. So I'm sure you'll get we all get a little bit of naysayers here
Oh,
and
right.
there, but there'll be a lot of people that gain value, and that's what's important here. So that's what
100%.
keeps things moving forward. Um,
And I just want to
so
point
before
out
we
that
wrap
like
it up,
everybody's facility and team is different too. Like, what is your configuration? Are you growing in a bed? Are you growing in a trough? Are you growing in a container? Like, not every like production method is the same that you can just slot out one like a cassette one practice for another.
right?
There's a lot that goes into this from clone or seedling all the way through to whatever your harvested good looks like. And so there's a lot of nuance to that. We're trying to set some commercial standards, and we're trying to like have some repeatable results and all that, and that's what I like to speak to. And I haven't been in every facility in North America, but I've been in dozens, and I've worked in a bunch of them, and I've consulted for a few of them, and I've helped build some too. So like I have a lot of data points as to like what like was going on is, and what the kind of the future sort of looks like. I do see a lot more organic. I do see a lot more regulations with respect to the environmental impact of cannabis production, because right now there's just a ton of U-line garbage, and there's just a ton of just like, it's a very waste intensive industry that needs to be addressed more than just what we're watering down the drains. Cannabis horticulture needs to be more normalized so we can not throw out so many gowning items that are unnecessary.
No, 100%. Those are very good points because that's what's going to make the industry sustainable, right, for the long term. Because we're
Yeah.
really still in the infancy of this industry, where we're learning how to walk, we're learning how to crawl, we're learning how to run, right? So we have to establish those good points now, so then when we are off to the races, we're able to run a marathon and not just a quick sprint and fall to our faces. So
Yeah.
before we wrap it up here, maybe let's touch base again on the Atlas seeds and the genetics that you are able to provide. So any listeners out there that are running commercial operations at scale are able to contact you as far as learning more about what genetics will work best for their situation and for their end product.
Yeah, so I mean, seeds are going to be a big part of cannabis agriculture, and more than ever. With these stabilized lines from Atlas Seed, what we're doing is we're offering, a scalable approach to cannabis production, and we have photoperiod as well as auto-flowering plants. The auto-flowering plants are fast, 65 to 75 days from emergence. You have a finished crop. You, depending on what climate zone you're in, you can do 2 crops a year in your field. A lot of growers don't have experience, or they've had a result that they weren't stoked with autos because haven't hit these elite new generation of them. So we do have photo period strains. A lot of the photos are like well-known marketable varieties. Mendo
Hmm.
Breath, Gelato, Banana Kush, Do, Sour D's, Blue Dream. So what we've done is we've hybridized them with, I like to say, a dash of ruderalis. So they're sub photo or sub auto. They grow like a photo period plant, big 5 foot tall plant, depending when you get it in, but they finish in the first week of
Mm-hmm.
September. So if you're in a climate zone that you're not in the Emerald Triangle, you don't have that, that those plants that can ripen there because of frost reasons, or even the light quality and intensity goes down in October, and when you're supposed to be doing your generative growth. So if you get the crop
Mm-hmm.
off in September, it's a huge advantage. You're first to market, the quality is better, the yields are good. So sub auto is the way to do it. And then we have the auto flowering lines, and the auto flowering lines are primarily OG crosses. They're fast, they're potent, and they stack. They make like really nice products. You can check out our website, atlasseed.com. You can shoot me an email, hi@legitexotics. We're working with an international distribution partner. So if anybody wants to just email me at hi@legitexotics.ca, I can get you the international info. We're going to be shipping these things legally from B2B and B2C. And that's a global play now that we're normalizing this as an actual industry. So working with the guys from Atlas in Sonoma, they know cannabis breeding for ag. And all these emerging markets, everybody wants like, solid, consistent genetics and not just, some hype strain that's got HLVD from some dude's garage is not a way to run a large scale commercial operation. So we've got
Right.
much better consistent seed lines, and we have data points from all over North America to back up the quality of the offering. So that's kind of that's the plug, bro.
Are there any events or any places to catch you?
Yeah, so in the next few months, I'll be at the BC Craft Convention in Kelowna. I believe it's at the El Dorado Hotel. That'll be the next trade event that we do. We'll have a booth set up, and we'll be there to talk about seed and genetic selection for cannabis horticulture, because it's been overlooked. Like, we got to sell this product, and we got to grow it for a cost that we can make money. And I think that's been overlooked by a lot of first movers. And so bringing seed into the scope of cannabis like production, I think really needs to be revisited by existing operators, because they're leaving a lot of money on the table by doing such intensive veg programs.
100%, 100%. Jeff, I want to thank you. You dropped a lot of value, a lot of knowledge here. So everybody that listened today, I hope you gained something from it. I'm not really hoping, I know you gained something from it. Whether you're a small cultivator that learned how to re-veg their favorite little seed that they have in their closet, to a commercial operation that needs to gain profitability and be sustainable for the next generation of growth here. So Jeff, thank you. I appreciate you. We met a long time ago, and our journey is still evolving and growing in this industry. And I'm excited for the future, man. And I'm excited we're able to sit down today and have this little chat here. So thank you to you, Jeff. Thank you for the listeners. This has been this episode of Clone Talk, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Peace.
Attention licensed operators in California. Are you looking for high quality nursery stock? Look no further than Refined Genetics. They provide top-notch clones, teens, and seeds to ensure the success of your operation. No order is too big. For a limited time, use discount code CLONECOACH for 10% off your first order. Don't miss out on this opportunity to secure a solid nursery partner. Contact sales@refinedgenetics.co. And yes, it's .co, not .com. Catch you on the next episode of Clone Talk. Do you want to be a guest on Clone Talk? It's easy. Just send me an email. heyclonecoach@gmail.com. We'll get you all set up. I look forward to having you on the next episode.